Welcome everybody to Getting APIs to Work. In today's episode, we'll talk to Harold Wiegers, who is a customer success manager for Axway in Australia and the API guy. Hey Harold, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on the show, Eric.
Thanks for joining. You agreed to talk with us about API sprawl. And since we're all interested in APIs and kind of a healthy growth of APIs, but then also some kind of management governance around it, I thought that's a super interesting topic.
It seems to be a bit of a fashion word. I think I've heard it about 5 times this week. So yeah, and I'm not native English, so I actually had to Google what sprawl is, but I figured it out. It's apparently people who sprawl.
Oh, yeah, you're the sprawl shirt.
I got the sprawl t-shirt as well. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not a native English speaker as well, and my only kind of recollection of that word is urban sprawl, right? Where I think it clearly has a negative connotation. It goes to these times when cities were growing, which is, I guess, good, but not in the way that people thought was healthy.
Well, nobody likes to be standing in traffic in a disorganized big city, but it's still pretty good that you've kind of live in a capital or a big city and not in somewhere where you don't have sprawl or urban sprawl.
Yeah, and it's a sign of growth, which I guess in many cases is what people are aspiring to, that you have more people living in a place, right? So that's good. Apparently that place is good to live in, otherwise you wouldn't have more people living there. But then again, you also want to kind of minimize maybe some of the negative side effects. So if you had to make a comparison between some of the negative side effects that people did see in these urban environments and some of the negative side effects that people see in those scenarios where they talk about API sprawl. So what are the negative side effects that people want to avoid?
Well, it's I think it's interesting when you look at the urban sprawl. Is people explain it like we had this beautiful city center, and then everything started growing, but somehow everybody's still attracted to the big city center, which is becoming a little bit hard to live in. And I think the same happens sometimes with our API programs, where you had this nice little core. And we started growing on the side angles, and then our core gets a little bit hard to live in, so to say.
And to some extent, I think you could even look at this in terms of how modern organizations are more and more turning away from the high centralization and to a more decentralized way of doing things, empowering business units to get more stuff done, right? So I think that general trajectory of more decentralization is what may also fuel these concerns about sprawl, right? That you say, oh, everything used to be so nicely centralized and under tight control, and now it's kind of growing and becoming more decentralized, and now we also are seeing some side effects. We have some issues around how that works. But again, right, I think in some way, it's nice that this happens.
It is. If we would have to create everything ourselves, then I don't think we would have the sprawl issue, so to say. I think the decentralization and giving some of that control over to others allows for sprawl to occur, because we don't have full control of everything anymore.
But you still want collaboration, right? I think that is the main issue here, is that even though you do have the decentralization going on, you still need some of these things to be connected, to work together so that everybody can get their stuff done. If we look at API sprawl and we look at what that actually means, which is also a little bit, let's say, of a capability or product sprawl, I do have this video where I talk about beer. And the way I talk about beer there is to say, if you look in the API space, then The API is the delivery mechanism. It's the bottle. And the stuff that you really care about is the beer. And the magic of good APIs is to make sure that A, you have good beer, and B, you design a delivery mechanism that allows people to consume the beer in a way that works for them.
We would have a similar item in our API, in our urban sprawl, right? We would have the roads, which is the delivery mechanism, but then on the roads, of course, we have people, and we have the actual other product, which is also trying to get there.
So we have the delivery mechanism, which you would say is the road, right, or the path. And that's good. So it needs to work so that people can actually get where they need to be or what they need to consume, right? They need to be able to get at it. But then the other question also is, and I think that is almost more the issue sometimes, is that the sprawl aspect also involves not just the access paths, but also the capabilities, right? So that people are concerned about, we'll have duplication. We won't have the one centrally contained way of doing things anymore. How does that work in that more decentralized scenario where you might say, well, you know, like the centralization stuff is not really what we want to happen all the time anymore?
With our APIs, we often think you should only have one API which does one thing, but in our daily life, there's often valid choices that we have double APIs which do the same thing or which leads to the same data point. And that's okay. In the same thing with our urban sprawl, we have roads which are being used by cars, and we have maybe a cycle paths which are being used by cyclists, and they all lead to the same destination. And it's these things we can embrace, and with APIs, we don't need to force everybody just to use one REST API. We know there's different cases from time to time, and we can cater for it.
And we also have the ability to have different destinations that people want to go to, right? Where we can say, and here's the second thing I want to hold up, which is tomato sauce.
Ah, tomato sauce.
Tomato
There can only be one.
There can only be one, yeah. So there's this great story by Malcolm Gladwell, right? Where he talks about the story of the guy who dedicated his life to researching tomato sauce and came away with the conclusion that there have to be more than one, right? If you try to create one tomato sauce that makes everybody happy, you end up with one tomato sauce that makes nobody happy.
Correct.
And in that design space, right, at least I think he identified then there has to be chunky and non-chunky sauce. And it doesn't really matter what the details in the tomato sauce space are. But I think the interesting learning from that is that once you have enough consumers that you want to satisfy, their interests diverge enough that trying to design the one single thing may not be the best way to go anymore, right? Which I think leads us to this interesting space where you can say, it's fine if there is a certain diversity, right? Maybe you don't want 30 or 40 variations because that is hard to manage and it's hard to find which one works for you and so forth. But maybe you actually are fine with 2 or 3 because you know that there's certain preferences in terms of consuming that. Is that something that you say would translate into the scenario of managing, let's say, API sprawl?
It absolutely does, Eric. It is all about how we manage, I think, our APIs and how we make sure that how we make it, well, first of all, visible, but also how we explain why we've decided to use different APIs, or we explain that this is the chunky and this is not so chunky tomato sauce. And most of the API sprawl, I mean, we all know that we don't live in a perfect world, but it's how do we handle the different requests and different items?
Yeah, so I think handling, right? So basically that's really this management and governance topic. It's like we are aware of the fact that, yes, growth is what we see and growth is actually good. What we want to minimize is waste and kind of non-productive growth, right? Where you just get more and more stuff, but it doesn't really contribute to the overall value in the system. And that, I think, is probably the maybe slightly dissatisfying takeaway of this, where you can say, yeah, sprawl is kind of a thing, but you need to manage it, and you need to make sure that you reduce or you minimize waste. And that, again, is also, it's a shifting target, right? If you look at API sprawl and urban sprawl again, right, it's not like this is just, there's one way of doing it and everybody does it that way and then it's fine everywhere.
Correct. I think we all know the story about having different versions on APIs, and they come for certain reasons, and sometimes having 10 versions of the same API is just something we have to go through. But in managing your sprawl, if you can avoid it and maybe disappoint a few people and force them to go to your version 10, then you can make a cracker of a version 11 API. I think it makes it very convoluted for people, and I think that's what sprawl is doing. And we have to keep our the bigger objective into our minds. You know, we want our companies to be running their business in a more digital way, and it's not always easy. The first thing which comes to our mind is just creating APIs, but once you cross that hurdle, is to make sure that the APIs really start working for you.
I think that's a good takeaway to say, yes, you have to make it easy to create APIs, because without APIs, you don't have any digital landscape to speak of. But you also have to make sure that you don't kind of become a victim of your own success, so that this landscape grows in ways that later on you might find are not as good as they could be. And that is, I think, where we run into these delicate issues of governance, centralization versus decentralization, and so forth.
Correct.
Any closing words from you, Harold?
I would say we can give some pointers to your great audience to see what they can do to the 5 handaways.
Think about tomato sauce.
Tomato sauce. Make it visible which one is which. Also,
very good. Give it labels, right? Give people a fighting chance to figure out which sauce am I getting. Is it working for me? Do I like it?
Make sure that you have your quality there. If you have your tomato sauce, it's not about quantity, but it's about a few nice tomato sauces which we all need. And quality you get quality by testing. I know we just lost 10% of the of your audience. Sorry, guys. Testing. Visibility of your APIs. It's not just about listing your swaggers. You can do a little bit more about it. But in order to find out how that is, I think you need to subscribe to the channel, which is a lovely channel. And then the actual closing words would be, I'm so happy I finally managed to make my way on your channel. It's been a lifelong dream. To make it from the other side of the planet of Australia. It's been really good. Love watching the show.
Thanks, Harold. And yes, this is actually a good point where it's like this. This makes it so nice to do these things, right? You can have conversations with people all around the globe. So this one is a co-production from Zurich, Switzerland, and Brisbane, Australia. So it's a truly intercontinental collaboration.
I know. We haven't had many people from the Southern Hemisphere on the show, so it's good.
Very true, very true. Maybe I'll look at the globe, and put little pins in there and make sure I have the globe covered. I'll think about that. Harold, thanks so much for joining. I think this was a really interesting conversation. So API sprawl, right? It's kind of a good thing, but you have to keep an eye on it. I think that's a good takeaway to really think about, like, focus on quality, focus on thinking what actually makes sense for people, and then you already will have quite a bit of an advantage over just a completely, let's say, uncontrolled sprawl. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have anything to say, please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm sure this will not be the last video that I did with Harold. So thanks for joining, and I hope to see you again soon.
Double thumbs up for me. Looking forward to making more of these.
Bye, everybody.